welcome back to Agritecture's travel-free digital conference series. I'm Brianna Zagami, and I'm Agritecture's media strategist. And today I'm joined with Robynne Anderson, who's the president of Emerging Ag. Today, Robynne is going to talk to us about the future of our food system. Hi, Robynne. Thanks for joining today.
Great pleasure to be here.
So I wanted to ask you, we're at this point where a lot of companies are adjusting to this new work from home and remote office lifestyle. And Emerging Ag has been doing that successfully for how long now?
For a decade, honestly. So much like agritecture, we kind of built out ready to go for this situation, not having this specifically in mind. But I ran an agricultural publishing company for many years, and we had a conventional office, and it was fantastic. But in 2010, when I started Emerging, I had a very conscious sense that I didn't want to have an office, that it didn't really seem to be something that was needed in the modern world. And it's allowed me to hire team members from literally all over the world and to look for the very best people who are well suited to what we need and what we do. And so we've been linked up and working from no physical office, but as a team this entire decade. So we're well experienced in this reality, and it's actually a lot of fun. It has a lot of flexibility built in.
So can you share some tips for some other companies who this is a new normal for them, and how to keep communication flowing, what you guys learned in the early stages of switching to having a remote office?
Well, absolutely. So I think there are some technology things you need. Obviously, Zoom and conferencing systems are all the rage, and they have been part of systems for a while, but that's important. You need a filing system that works. Most companies have those built into their mechanism, some kind of server. Remote access may be challenges for them, but these things can be overcome. We happen to use Dropbox. But then you also have to think about the other functions that an office plays for you. So keeping each other informed, having the proverbial water cooler chat. We use WhatsApp for that. We have WhatsApp for specific work things, but we also have a no crisis line where we share each other's information. People could take pictures from a party or something cute their kids did, or something they've just seen that's an interesting news clip, and it kind of keeps the conversation rolling around the group and gives you that level of personal interaction. We are using tools that allow us to interact. We set up mini teams that have regularized calls, and we really also think about another element beyond the technology. And I think that's something that people are really going to struggle with the most. And what I would say is you really need to deploy your management skills in this new environment. So the things that people still need in terms of coaching, in terms of support, in terms of regularized meetings with their managers, still need to happen. So I really encourage people to think about the way to build out a team and help people make sure that they're not feeling isolated. So that means a little extra effort on one-on-one meetings that you might have had at your desks. You still need to have them as a manager and the person involved.
Yeah, I think that's definitely important, especially including the social outside of regular work conversations, just to keep everyone kind of connected and everyone knows what's going on in each other's lives outside of, the virtual workplace.
Exactly.
So I'll let you get started. The future of food systems.
Well, the future of food systems is very, very topical right now because there is going to be this once in a generation opportunity to get the whole world focused on food systems. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Guterres, has indicated that they will convene a summit in 2021, and he's appointed a fantastic woman named Agnes Calabata, who is his special envoy in preparation for this summit. And we will see all of the world's leaders from 193 different countries that are part of the UN start talking about food systems, and what we need. And frankly, it's very hard to keep agriculture sometimes on the agenda globally. And so having this opportunity to link conversations that are happening about food in the world to the conversations that are happening about the agriculture that produces them and the entire system that supports them is really very important. And I think that's reflects the fact that there's quite a bit of uncertainty about the future of agriculture. We've seen a lot of questions raised about practices. We've seen farmers on the front line of global climate change. We have challenges with some fairly dark clouds looming about how the planet's functioning and about our food systems are working. And sometimes it also falls to the fact that agriculture can be characterized as being old-fashioned or, on the other hand, super intensive. You have these sort of paradigms of farmers either being sort of hicks in coveralls, or these people who are overusing the land. And sometimes we see it as poor or easily forgotten, given that farming is actually the largest constituency of workers in the world. Farmers are actually more than 1.3 billion people depend on farming for their household livelihoods. And if you consider any other sector, it would be hard to think of one that has that kind of footprint around the globe. So making sure that we don't forget about the people who are living in rural areas is really important. In a country like I'm from, in Canada, rural areas still need lots of access to bandwidth, services, infrastructure questions. And if you think about it at a global level, you have fully the largest portion of the world, over 80% of the world that lives in multidimensional poverty lives in rural areas. So effectively, they are the people who are poor and forgotten. They don't have more than $1.25 a day in income, but they don't have access to fresh water. They don't have proper running sanitation, access to hospitals, or even education in some cases. And those are not questions of slums in cities alone. It is absolutely the case that most of that challenge lies in rural areas. And now, suddenly, food and food systems are also seeming very necessary, because there's been a wake up in other parts of the world about the fact that we can't take food for granted. And if you think about some of the impacts of COVID-19, there's a lot of discussion, first and foremost, about public health. And I want to express concern for all of the people who are facing challenges, either because they're facing the illness or because they're in confinement, and to thank the healthcare workers around the world who've done so much to help all of us move through this. But we also have to think about food security, and whether it's a momentary sense of empty grocery store shelves, there are issues about keeping food security moving all the way through this. So for a start, trade of food is going to be absolutely essential. Some of the most affected areas are going to need to be able to import even more food, and we are going to see disruptions around this. So keeping ports open, keeping the documents moving for food that allow us to get food moved back and forth, it's really important. And we have to consider that a lot of the social protection systems set up for things like unemployment insurance are for workers, and farm workers need that support. But also farmers and many small business people who do food production, small scale food production, all are self-employed and may not be innately qualified for the unemployment insurance measures. So making sure that there's support for those people as well. And then thinking about the continuity of the supply chain all the way through, from the things that are needed right to produce the food to getting it into port. So where we have port positions backed up, inconsistencies with people having closed businesses so the ports can't get television sets moved out, and meanwhile we have ships sitting outside on the ocean waiting to come into port to offload grains and food products that we actually need to feed people in these critical moments. And then also to think about the inputs that we need. So right now, farmers in our parts of the world are going to be gearing up for seeding. In other parts of the world are going to be gearing up for harvest. They need to be able to have access to the workers who help with those harvests, and to think about the inputs like seed, fertilizer, veterinary supplies, etc., needed to keep that food chain moving, so we don't have a problem by next harvest season that we weren't able to get those crops in. And then the opportunity to think about it, maximizing the efficiency between human and animal health. And also, let's keep remembering there are major issues like a locust crisis that is affecting the Horn of Africa and countries like Kenya and Somalia, where a locust outbreak is causing another kind of public health crisis around food security. So there is a lot to keep us very focused right now on food systems. But I also want to talk about where we look at food systems beyond that, because there is a whole new world of farming where we're seeing robotics, we're seeing data-driven solutions, we're seeing innovations like cellular agriculture, where we're finding ways to produce proteins in new ways. So there's so much going on. There's so many opportunities. And at the same time, we also are having conversations about how to make that agriculture closer to nature, because we're conscious that we also want to make sure that we're doing agriculture in a way that is sustainable. And the more and more demand we have on our agricultural systems, the more demand we are putting on the planet. But we have this discussion about food systems that are full of absolutely false dichotomies. So we have models of people who are saying, I want to go this way, and we want to go back to farming as it happened 200 years ago, and everything will be fine and great because it will be closer to an older system that is replicable. But those systems also had failures. And we talk about the new innovations, and we want to go towards technology-driven systems that may not be accessible in many rural areas yet. The reality is that we spend a lot of time talking about completely false dichotomies. We say it's rural against urban, and never the twain shall meet. We talk about farmers and we talk about consumers like they aren't in a food system that intersects all of them. We talk about people, 850 million people are going hungry in the world. And we talk about obesity at the same time, with 2 billion people facing obesity. These challenges seem to be pitting our food against our planet. But in fact, the whole food system actually needs all these pieces to work together. And part of what I'd like us to be thinking about now is, at this moment, when we have a food system summit coming up, are we in the agri-food value chain and the people beyond it spending time fighting about false dichotomies about one versus the other, instead of focusing on how we do it better together? Because these false dichotomies are distracting us from an agenda that's actually really exciting. Because in those fields of those discussions is a path forward, we think, to a food system that is diverse, that creates diverse diets that support nutrition, that creates diverse plantings that support biodiversity, that supports diverse systems that lead to outcomes. And many farming systems are needed to achieve the food system we want. And all of it is dependent on diversity and actually a spirit of mutual respect. So I just wanted to bring this level of excitement that I feel and that I see burgeoning through these opportunities, but also to create a clarion call that we all work together towards that food system summit in a fresh new way. Thanks.
Thank you, Robynne. I think you bring up a lot of really important parts about how this really is a system and not different segregated elements, and we all really need to be working together. So I have a few questions for you. first, you talk about how agriculture is hard to be made a part of the political agenda. So I'm curious, how can we make it? How can we start viewing agriculture as a priority? Um, how do we link it to our political agendas?
Fantastic. I think this food summit is exactly that opportunity is that often when agriculture ministers meet, they are talking about agriculture policy. They're not talking necessarily about nutrition or health policy or finance policy or infrastructure policy, but all of those things are necessary. And the example of the COVID situation that I gave you shows how a problem at port could affect food security on a grocery store shelf, or that same problem at port if they have a new seed variety that a farmer needs to plant might actually affect our food security next harvest season. So seeing those interlinkages is very, very rare. And having a convening where we could see heads of state, presidents, prime ministers, leaders in a variety of ways be present and talk constructively together might lead to understanding that decisions made on an infrastructure project could result in a value chain getting more successfully to a city for fresh fruits and vegetables or any other agricultural product. But that level of coordination doesn't happen. So I think people need to do that domestically and join those things up at a political level. And we also need to do it as a sector. One of my roles is helping to provide the secretariat for the International Agri-Food Network, which is made up of the value chain all the way from seed to the International Food and Beverage Alliance. So that value chain often has quite disparate conversations. So there are conversations happening about nutrition that don't actually talk about farming and the importance of crop rotations and how to link those ideas up. So that the sector as a whole can help itself by finding better ways to join up to talk about what we can do. And I think that has to happen in a spirit that's a little more focused on what is needed and a little less on, well, my way is the best way. It's my way or the highway, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And just looking at what's currently happening with this pandemic, based on just images from our grocery stores, everything is out of stock. It almost looks like that we are about to go through a food shortage. So, what does this current pandemic teach us about our current global food system? Where is it broken? What's working? What can we learn from this?
Oh, so many things to learn from this. For a start, I think it's going to change the conversation globally. Um, it, we've had this discordant conversation where a chunk of developing countries say agriculture is about poverty and food security in the sense of tackling hunger. And I literally was in meetings just a month ago in New York where on the very same day saw the president of the UN General Assembly say compellingly, agriculture and food is about poverty and food security. And then in a different meeting in a different part of the UN, I heard somebody say, well, obviously the food systems discussion is about climate change and obesity. And I don't understand why we're talking about them like they're separate. They are linked up. But it has reflected perhaps a world of abundance in a number of developed countries where there has been the bandwidth to talk about obesity, to talk about climate change, and to take for granted the food security questions. And the reality is we may all feel now like we're all in it together, and we may no longer see those as two separate conversations. We may understand in a whole different way that we need that continuity.
Yeah, I think it's important for everyone to see climate change as a convergence of these global crises, a food and water crisis, an energy crisis, a public health crisis. We need to start looking at it as, again, a system of problems and not these individual issues. And I think just going off of that, you talk a lot about this dichotomy of rural versus urban, and this is also something that agritecture looks into. And how can we bridge this gap between rural and urban and start looking to where can urban fill in the gap of rural and traditional agriculture? Is it about information sharing? Is it training and technology? Where do you see us being able to bridge this gap?
Well, I think it goes back to the question of continuity. So there is an important and exciting trend related to urban agriculture, vertical farming. There's so many cool things going on. And this development is fantastic, and it needs to happen because we need more fresh food supply around the world. So deploying urban spaces to be successful and integrated and to incorporate living and growing things into those spaces is exactly the right decision. Framing it as, well, urban agriculture will replace rural agriculture is probably not a very constructive conversation. The fact is the majority of food is still going to be produced on the larger land base we have. So urban farming can help create less food loss and waste. It can create more diversity in urban areas. It can reduce costs, and it can create more nutritious diets, particularly by focusing on higher value products that are well suited to quite intensive systems like lettuces, strawberries, horticultural products. So that would be great. But if we tried to produce every avocado in this world under greenhouse production when they grow on trees, and then, or in the case of Canada, if we were to build out all of our avocado production because we wanted complete domestic food security for avocados or mangoes or bananas or oranges, we would cause an environmental footprint that would be beyond imagination, because we'd have to build that all out in greenhouses and light it artificially instead of letting plants naturally do what they do best, which is photosynthesis, which is take energy from sunlight and convert it into literally energies and sugars and foods that we can use. So understanding where people have the right best critical value to add is important. So Canada's great at growing oats and wheat and canola and crops that are specialized. And obviously we're great at maple sugar, and we have great seafood. And there's this whole range of products that we do super well. And we should help Canada get even better at that. And America should get even better at the parts that it grows really well. And Mexico should get even better at avocado production and some of its great crops. And we should make sure that we're getting built into cities diversity of food that makes very highly perishable foods, especially a priority for easy moving around cities and urban areas and meeting market needs. And then we should embrace the trade that allows us to recognize the ecology that we're growing crops in, and make sure that crops that grow well at tropical or warmer latitudes are growing very effectively there and able to get to people who still want to benefit from the vitamin C you can get in an orange.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a future food system that I would want to be a part of, and one that benefits our people and our planet.
Thanks.
So thank you so much for your presentation. Before we sign off, I just want to give you the floor one more time to share any final comments. Where can we connect with you? Where can we learn more about emerging ag? I know you have some contact information here on the screen, but any final comments?
Thanks so much. Well, just to say, it's a pleasure to join you for this session and to have a chance to talk about how food systems are evolving and what we need to do to get ready to talk about that in a constructive way in 2021. My company is Emerging Ag. We are based globally, and you can reach us at emergingag.com and on Twitter as well. And also to say that the number one thing that I think we need heading into food systems is that spirit of collaboration and coordination, because the way we're going to do this best is that we agree we're all working together, and then we identify the gaps and think about ways we can jointly close them up to make sure that people have the food they need when they need it, with the diversity that they need to get the nutrition they want, and still to do it in a way that helps the planet.
Yeah, that's a great conclusion. I think it's a great reminder. We all need to keep working together and keep pushing the industry forward, even in challenging times like this.
Stay safe, everyone.
Stay safe. Thank you.
Bye.